Adios, BuzzFeed News. The website is shuttering, according to senior news reporter Oliver Darcy over at CNN. BuzzFeed's CEO, Jonah Peretti, just sent out a note to staff announcing the closing of BuzzFeed News as part of layoffs, where 15% of staffers will be cut across the company. Peretti says, for BuzzFeed News, we have begun discussions with the News Guild about these actions.
Glenn Greenwald tweeted, BuzzFeed News is shutting down. Company laying off 180 staffers, 15% of the staff laid off. The remainder will just be tossed under the collapsing brand of the Huffington Post. Multi-pronged disintegration of the digital liberal media. Yeah, this is big because, BuzzFeed News really made a name for itself doing more substantive reporting under Ben Smith that I think a lot of people predicted from the BuzzFeed brand, which was huge in, I'd say, the early aughts, 2010 sort of an era.
Yeah. 2010
through 2014,
2016-ish.
Yeah. And it was driven largely by these listicles and quizzes and pop culture tie-ins that were so addictive. I remember starting basically every morning at my computer with 10 minutes at least of BuzzFeed.
Which grapefruit are you?
Exactly. You have to know which Twilight character people must know.
Yeah.
But then when
you
BuzzFeed
don't like the one
News
you get, you take it again.
Right. But BuzzFeed News really took off and was having a lot of substantive success under Ben Smith, and up and until I think the publishing of the Steele dossier really undermined the credibility of the institution somewhat. Now, interestingly, Ben Smith wrote an op-ed in The Atlantic today. It seems tied to the news of BuzzFeed News shutting down.
He's not still there, we should mention. He became the New York Times. He was doing great columns at the New York Times about media criticism, and then left that to start Semaphore, which has a team of reporters, including Dave Weigel, who we had on the show earlier today. Sorry, go ahead.
Right. So the title of this piece from today in The Atlantic is, After All That, I Would Still Publish the Dossier. Yeah. The subtitle, But I Would Do Some Things Differently. So it'll be an interesting moment and a kind of retrospective to reflect on what seemed to be the last halcyon days of digital free media.
We will certainly miss such classics as 37 Things White People Need to Stop Ruining in 2018, 20 Reasons Why White People Can't Be Trusted, written by someone who looks white to me, but what do I know?
Sounds like you don't like white people, Robbie.
I just hate them. I actually went to this article, but this shows the whole problem with the format. I can't look at, it's a list of, GIFs or something. It's a list of GIFs, but they're all broken. You can't see them
Remember
anymore.
GIFs? When did those go the way of the dinosaur?
I still use GIFs. Is it cringe to use GIFs on Twitter or something?
I think it is. I think it's considered to be millennial cringe. But look, what do you make of Glenn's analysis here? I mean, I do think that a part of the story has to be the role that Facebook has played in undermining the revenue streams for so many of these websites that depended on advertisers. But if most people are getting their news on these kind of aggregate websites like Facebook, the actual print, the media publications that are actually generating the content just aren't getting a piece of the pie, and that's caused a lot of the problems with
I imagine BuzzFeed was significantly affected by something that has affected all media companies, which is Facebook changing something about the algorithm. This happened 2019-ish, that led to much less traffic to news websites. Everybody was affected by this. Articles that would easily go viral on Facebook, that would get like hundreds of thousands of views very quickly because they were shared on Facebook, and Facebook was a prime driver of news. Probably if you're not in the news industry, you may not be aware that from 2014 to 2020, Facebook was, for all news outlets, with rare exception, was a major driver of traffic to the website.
Yeah.
And overnight that stopped. And that really hurt a lot of publications, I suspect, including BuzzFeed.
Yeah, I think that's right. The CEO said, this is from the New York Times, and in the memo to employees about the layoffs, that he, quote, made the decision to overinvest in BuzzFeed's news division because he loved the work it produced, but acknowledged that he had been slow to accept that social media platforms would not provide the financial support needed to make BuzzFeed News profitable. He said, I've learned from these mistakes, and the team moving forward has learned from them as well. We know the changes and improvements we are making today are necessary steps to building a better future. He also mentioned that part of what's going on here is the pivot to video, and that the preference for these kind of vertical video platforms has meant that fewer people are consuming print media, and they are choosing to get their content in digital form, it's an interesting trade-off because so much of what happens on video media is based on the reporting that's done by these kinds of journalists. And I don't know that AI is going to be an adequate substitute.
That is another interesting point to bring up. That is another thing Facebook did. That time, I think inadvertently, although I think they also got sued for it, they misreported how well native video was doing on Facebook, and that convinced a lot of media companies to pivot to video, to produce more video in order to succeed on Facebook. And the analytics were not correct. What was reported, I don't think it was. I'm not alleging it was like deliberately malicious, but it was misreported. It was several factors off. Several exponentially less popular video was on Facebook than Facebook had claimed it was. That misled a lot of companies. There was a big lawsuit over that. I'm looking at the trending quizzes right now. I'll tell you which Friends character matches your personality, but first you have to share your home design. The bargaining going on here. Only a true celeb expert will be able to get 11 out of 15 on this astrological compatibility quiz.
Well, those are important, and I hope that those get preserved somewhere.
So you can be a true celeb expert, and you're still only going to get 11 out of 15.
Well, some people really are going to miss this app. One Twitter user commented, "I'm sorry, but 95% of their content was garbage. Why your friends are problematic is not a news story." In response, Washington Post reporter Gene Park said, "This comment illustrates BuzzFeed's long-standing branding issue. The part of BuzzFeed that makes the content is still going to exist. BuzzFeed News is shutting down, and they didn't create content like this." Right.
I am further compounding that error as I laugh and make fun of BuzzFeed quizzes. Yeah, that part is not what they're shutting down. They're shutting down the journalism part of it, which was separate from the quizzes and all that.
Yeah, and it's worth noting, Peretti, the CEO, says that the remaining staff will be focusing more on the company's. He told the remaining staff that he would be focusing more of the company's energy going forward on AI, saying we will empower our digital teams and at all of our brands to do the very best creative work and build an interface where that work can be repacked.
Well, AI
and brought
can probably
to
make those quizzes very easily,
more effectively. But again, this isn't about the quizzes, Robbie. This is about whether or not this news is going to be affected. They're shutting down BuzzFeed News, which outside of the Steele dossier did do some sensitive reporting. Ben Smith got a lot of accolades for how he was able to go against expectations and make BuzzFeed News into a real news juggernaut at a time when other news media were flailing. So the idea that there's this kind of acknowledgement that AI, artificial intelligence, is going to be a better bet for doing what? It's not going to do investigative reporting. Are they basically conceding that there's a kind of AP-style repackaging of events that is going to get spit out on the site? If so, I got to say that's a real shame. Just recently, David Sirota at The Lever scooped a story about how the Fox News is going to be able to write off all or some of the payment, the 700 odd million that they owe over the Dominion voting trial, or trial that never was, lawsuit, write it off on their taxes. And former host Crystal Ball noted that it's kind of remarkable that a small outlet like that keeps getting all these scoops and doing all this investigative reporting. We've had status coup reporters who were on the ground in East Palestine when all the other journalists have left, talking about their experiences there. And unfortunately, independent media like Status Coup and The Lever seem increasingly to be the only ones who are willing to invest and actually doing the investigative reporting that makes the news. Are we all going to be hinging on this really tenuous lever of a few, lever pun not intended, of a few small outlets like that doing the work that bolsters an entire online digital media enterprise?
Well, I don't know. It's definitely going to be a different media ecosystem moving forward. But I think some of these companies got too big for their britches. They had really good years, good times, and they invested a lot. And they, the evaluations they got were bonkers, and over time they couldn't. Right, but also, weren't worth that.
But also, the funding model has fundamentally changed in a way that is not it's not entirely the fault of these institutions or the quality that is being produced. If you can't get advertisers to fund your newspaper in the classic sense, the way that newspapers have been funded since time immemorial, because They're reading their news on another app that is getting all those advertisers. They're reading their news on Facebook. Why would I pay Buzzfeed to advertise on their page when I can get it on Facebook and pay them all of the money? That's a fundamental modeling problem that's going to cause a lot of socially useful, very beneficial, conceivably profitable industries to go out of business. Well, and that's a problem that needs to be addressed at its root.
Sure, there will be alternative funding models like there is for the subscriber model, the donor model, all sorts of things. I'm not going to be fatalistic about it. It's just going to be different.
Fatalistic. We already see local news is basically dead. We're at the end of print journalism. I mean, it's not fatalistic to observe what's already happened.
The New York Times is doing better than ever.
So it's a good thing that big corporate-run institutions like the New York Times, with all the bias that it has that we've been reporting on, are basically the only people who can survive in this media
infrastructure. The only people. The media ecosystem is more diverse.
No, the Twitter, the online YouTube media ecosystem can proliferate, but we have to rely on real news that somebody has to generate somewhere. And being cavalier about the reality that we're all basically relying on the same corporate media sources, that's a real problem. The subscription model, look at what's happening with everybody. They thought it was going to be a deal getting rid of basic cable. Now we're all paying cable prices in the form of $7 here, $7 there, $7 here. The same thing is happening with news. People like us, we have to have subscriptions to a million different websites because we have to read and report on the news. But the average person is not going to be paying $50 out of pocket every month because they want to read Rolling Stone and they want to read the New York Times and they want to read New York Magazine and they want to read whatever else.
They pay for one or two or however many they can afford for people who process that and give you, like that's kind of what we do. We give you the highlights of what appears in various other publications. We give our own impressions of what's good reporting, what's bad reporting. We do it from two different perspectives.
Yeah, but who's going to do more good reporting? Having someone to weigh in on what you can trust and what you can't, that's good. Mm-hmm. But it's necessary to have people who are actually doing investigative journalism, and nobody wants to fund it. And there's not a subscription model for that unless you want to go ahead and donate to Status Quo or The Lever.
I don't agree with that. I think there's a lot of people doing very good investigative work that is funded directly by their supporters, and that's great, and that's going to be the future, and so be it. More Rising right after this.